Hello, everybody. Welcome to session 2 of our conference workshop. I'm going to get us started with by sharing my screen here. And excellent. So here we go. This is Learning Evaluation Fundamentals number 2. And for those of you who might not have been here last week, you might want to know where I'm situated. I am a principal at Tier 1 Performance. We're a performance improvement company. We help organizations activate their business operations and L&D strategies. We do that through the people. We really believe that people are the most important leverage point for performance improvement. And in our mission statement, we believe that what we want to do is to help people do their best work, making the world of work more healthy, productive, and rewarding. We won some awards. I'm not a big award guy, although my colleagues are doing excellent work. What I do like to point out is that we have been voted one of the best places to work. We're an employee-owned company, and we have passed, we're a B Corp, which means that we've passed some social responsibility requirements. If this at all intrigues you, if you want to think about maybe moving your career in a direction toward Tier 1, let me know. I'd be glad to speak with you about that. All right, so here we have our schedule. And let me find you guys first because you disappeared. All right, there you are. Too many windows open. Not enough doors. Okay, so we are now, last week I was away and you had some self-paced activities to engage in. This week, we're doing live session number 2 on learner surveys, an introduction to learner surveys. Next week, we'll focus on advanced topics. And I'm going to give you some homework at that time as well, so that in week 7, you have something interesting to do. And then in week 8, we'll get back and we'll talk about some common mistakes in evaluation. We'll talk about sort of the messiness of it, and I'll maybe share some wild ideas in that session as well. Just so you know, put this on your calendar. This is next week. I know next week starts on October 31st. So we might not think that November is coming right around the edge, but it is. If you want to talk to me individually about anything related to learning evaluation or anything in general, feel free to show up at the office hours, but you want to probably put that on your calendar right now. So that's 12 noon New York time or 8 p.m. New York time. We do have 2 times so that people around the world can find a place, find a time in their schedule. All right, so what I thought I would do, I'm a big believer in spaced repetition. So what I thought I'd do is sort of remind us of some of the things we went through last week. First of all, when we talk about learning evaluation, we always want to ground it in the work that we do. And we do important work. Those hearts are there to give us some love. But with the great impact we have great responsibility. One of those is learning evaluation. And unfortunately, we have found through the years, but also indicated this year as well, 2/3 of us don't think our learning team is able to do the learning measurement it wants to do. 2/3 of us. One of the most important things I like to emphasize is we measure to make something happen, to make better decisions, to take better actions, and to earn the reputation so that we can get resources and the autonomy to do effective learning designs, to do the work that we want to do. We have as learning professionals, we don't always dress this nicely anymore, but when we collect data, we want to have these things kept in mind. And it really is about our most important decisions. What are some of those? We brainstorm some, and these are just some of the main things we want to focus on. I'll let you skim through those. Jane, you are the epitome of an excellent dresser. Yes, thank you. Thank you for joining us. And you've got a nice smile there too. Okay.
The question is, how am I being evaluated?
Yes. Well, in Zoom, we don't care about your shoes or your pants, so it's all good. All right. The other thing we talked about was when we measure stuff, we are illuminating some things, right? What we measure, we're illuminating, but there's other things we're not illuminating, we're not focusing on. In fact, one of the dangers is that we get like a pretty dashboard up and we're just looking at what's focused on there, and then we forget that we're not measuring things. We're not really looking at the whole picture. So that's important to keep in mind. Emphasized over and over that there's no perfect measurement, there's no perfect learner survey, there's no perfect learning evaluation, etc. Go Jane. And also, I emphasize this book, or I mentioned this book because it's really great. It says data is good, but data is not necessarily good. Sometimes when we have more data, we make worse decisions. So just to be careful about that. Don't fall into the trap of thinking more data is always better. We talked about when we measure, if we measure at the end of learning or toward the end of learning, in some way that's a bias metric because people are going to slide down the forgetting curve. And to be fully, we can get hints about remembering an application here, but to really nail it down and know for sure, we need to have some kind of delayed test. We also talked about the fact that knowledge question, or what Schrock and Crosskey call memorization questions, are not really acceptable to certify people as competent. And really, we want to aim up here. We talked about the fact that in a lot of our models, evaluation is put toward the end, but it really should be thought of in the very beginning stages. We talked about some of the chinks in the armor of the dominant evaluation model, the Kirkpatrick-Cattell 4-level model. But we did say, I said, look, it does send some beneficial messages, some beneficial nudgings, but it also sends some harmful ones as well. And we talked about LTEM, that it's a 8-page, 8-tier framework, 1 page, and there's a 34-page report that goes into that. And you guys chimed in about where you are today on the LTEM tiers. This is what you said you were doing today, your organization was doing today. And this is some of your future goals over here. I also did share my learning evaluation philosophy because I asked you about yours. I don't know if this captures everything I think about, but these are some of the main points. I'll let you skim through those. And again, this is going to be in the recording, and you probably saw that from last week as well. All right, so you had homework to read the LTEM report and to do the learner survey diagnostic. I know at least one of you, my hiking partner in crime, Rich James, he had a little trouble getting it, but Esther gave him the link. But these were the 2 homework assignments. So I thought we should, stop and see if, and this is what that looked like. Stop and see if you had any reflections, if this made you think of anything, if you have any questions. Yeah, so I'm not going to ask you if you did the homework. It's all in the honor system. And some of you may have missed the first session. But any questions or reflections from either of these activities? And there's a small enough group so you could go off mute and unmute yourself and share your thoughts.
Well, I think from mine or from our end, it was good to go through the LTEM again, but we've been trying to use it with my team, I think, for the past a little bit over a year and a half to design our evaluation, but actually also, as I mentioned in the end of the report, to use it as a way to guide us to do learning design. But it's always good to get reminded again. And the learner survey diagnostic also puts, I think it puts the finger to a few things that we're still not that great at. We've been trying to use some of your performance-focused learner surveys as well, ever since you released the latest version of your book. But there are still quite some ways to go until we fully are able to practice that. But I think it always raises some good questions, and it also raises a good sort of like self-reflection to really see, are we there? No, maybe we think we're better than where we actually are.
Yeah, that's great. And in fact, that's the reason I designed that diagnostic. You know, it's not like a scientific diagnostic or anything, but it's really just to get you thinking. And it's really good to work in a team. In fact, if any of you are interested, I just thought of this. At Tier 1, we have this, we're calling it PDIYI, Performance Development in Your Inbox. And what we do is we give materials away. We give them for free. And they're designed for, you know, a leader to take a team through an exercise. And we have one on habit science, and we have one on performance focused learner surveys. And this diagnostic is part of that tool, but we have some other reflection exercises. If you're interested in that, let me know and I can hook you up with that. But yeah, that's why we have that. And I'm glad that these were good reflection tools for you, even though you had focused on LTEM in the past. Reading the report seemed to be helpful again. Thank you, Peter. What else?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say in the past, like being exposed to a lot of this content, we really have changed our approach with our learner surveys. And so, you know, we use some of the nudging techniques in our questioning. I've largely gotten away from Likert scale kind of questions to options that are actually much more informative, and have certainly found that when we get the results back, it feels much more immediately actionable by writing the surveys in that way. So that's just like a couple of examples of insights I've had in the past, and it has worked for us to really shift our approach in that direction.
That's great. Well, thank you. Appreciate that endorsement. Thanks, Shelley. What else?
Well, for my part, I work for an agency and I go from one customer to another. And right now, looking at the survey, it would be a surprise to them. And I'm trying to figure out what will be the arguments I could provide for them to invest a bit more. Of course, they wouldn't get to tier 8, but go a bit more towards transferring. So yeah. I'm looking for, they need to put money in a bit more.
Yeah, well, you know, I think that's a really good point. One of the things I found that's really helpful is, or just to know that a lot of people are thinking in many varied ways about learning evaluation. And, you know, for us to be influential, to persuade, to move things forward, we need to be able to be somewhat eloquent in letting them know new ways to think about it. So it's a process. It takes time. We sort of have to have a change management approach to it. But some of the ways that I'm sharing them with you, I have found successful in the past. So you might want to just steal those and use those and improve on those as well. So. All right, what else? What else? Other reflections from the homework?
So I've got a couple things, Will.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, Will. Admittedly, did not do the homework in the last couple of weeks, but I have looked at your stuff really closely in previous years. You know, one question I have for you, and if this exposes any naivete, I'm open to that. You know, Kirkpatrick level 2 learning, right? You don't use the word learning necessarily, you use the word knowledge, and you have that broken up into three, right? The 3 different tiers, and,
yes.
And, you know, and you're very purposeful about that, and I really appreciate that. Is there anything more to why you didn't sort of focus on learning and instead focus on knowledge? And I ask that because sort of, is the interest more in level of knowledge versus level of learning? If that makes sense.
Well, so you're asking me to go back 5 years and go into my head at that point in time?
Not necessarily. So
well, that's fine.
I mean, it's a different question, right? Like, did they learn is a different question of do they know?
No, my caveat is just that I don't know how I don't know how accurate I'm going to be, but I can guess what I was thinking.
Sure.
So first of all, learning is a very fuzzy word, right? is it the activity or is it the outcome, right? Did I learned? Well, what is that? Is that, I was involved in some, thinking about things, or was that I learned and I have the outcome? So there's that fuzziness there. So sometimes I don't always try to avoid the word learning. If you've taken my presentation science workshop, you know that I use L in LRA, to engage, to learn, to remember, and act. So learning sometimes has a funny connotation. What I wanted to do in LTEM is to guide people's thinking clearly. And learning, because people have different ways of thinking about it, tends to be people are all over the map in the way they think about it. I probably didn't use it for that reason.
Yeah.
If you remember the number of iterations I went through, there was one iteration where it had 15 levels of learning evaluation. And probably I might have even gotten a little more specific about some of the aspects of it. But you can't go too much detail, because then people's eyes glaze over. So it seemed like knowledge, decision-making competence, and task competence was a fairly good categorization scheme.
Yeah, and I love it. Like, I'm 100% behind you. It's just been interesting. Next week, I'm doing a presentation of my organization on level 2, Kirkpatrick level 2, and I have to stick with Kirkpatrick. That's
Yep.
what they want me to talk about. But then I got into this sort of philosophical or existential question of like, well, what is learning? If we're talking about did they learn, we really should talk about what is learning. And then I just started spinning. And then I went back to LTEM and I was like, oh wait, okay, let's just get out of that existential like question of, like you're saying, like, what is learning? What are we talking about here? And really just focus, on something a little more, a simpler question.
Yeah.
So that was just one thing. The other thing, just I think it's almost like a little Easter egg that you have in the 34-page report on the CETA model, which
yeah.
I remember the very first time I read through that hit me, and I just was like, it's not even necessarily like evaluation. It's just like really good design and really good way to think through a design process. So just want to thank you again for putting that little Easter egg in there for us.
Yeah, no, I love the CETA. I love CETA. If you haven't seen it, it's just I use it a lot for developing scenario-based questions. Anyway, I don't want to go too deep into that, but yeah, CETA is great. Take a look at it if you haven't seen it. All right. How about one more, if you got it, or we can just move forward?
Well, yeah, actually, I have a question around sort of like adapting to different cultures when we're thinking about questions. And so I was in Ruth Clark's session earlier, and we were talking about sort of the personalization principle and how that might not apply equally in everywhere in the world. That, the idea of using really informal sort of language might not work in some countries as well as others. Are there any times that you've adapted questions based on sort of adjusting for culture and cultural expectations around learning? Or
I've worked with some. Well, there's the cultural expectations, and then there's the language differences as well. So most of the time, if I work with a group, we are sort of going back and forth, right? We have an iterative process. So I might phrase it one way, and then I sort of say, hey, improve it. And so that sort of takes care of that improvement. In terms of language difficulties, what people have done is they will translate, they'll translate for me their initial take, and I'll write it up in English. And then, if I don't, okay. I would say if I don't know the language, I don't know many other languages very well, so that really goes out the window. But sort of go back and forth, and sometimes we can do sort of reverse translations, where we translate it back into the original language to see if that's appropriate as well. But yeah, you have to be sensitive to that. And you got to work with people on the ground. Like, if I tried to create something for like a Japanese audience by myself, it wouldn't go that well.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking about programs where we're trying to implement in multiple countries, or we have an organization-wide program, and 90+ business units. And so how do we measure accurately across those, but account for the cultural differences within?
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. You know, a lot of organizations I work with, I get surprised and they say, well, our sort of business language is English, so we don't worry about it. But they're probably missing out, right? A little bit, in the culture aspects anyway. Great point. All right, let's go forward. Yeah, those were the questions. Okay, so question for you. I think I asked you this one earlier, but we're going to touch on this again today. So for those of you who weren't here, when designing learning, should we base our learning methods on the preferences of our learners? Learners are fairly good judges of their own learning, so we should trust their intuitions to inform our learning design decisions. Whoops. Or learners are not often good judges. So A or B, and I know it could be somewhere in between, but if you had to choose. This audience, the LDA audience, such cynics. Hey, Rich, why don't you share the link to our great hiking adventure for those who might be interested for later consumption? Don't look at it now. Don't do it now. Yeah, Rich and I walked up a river, 8 hours up and back. It was great.
I have a version without that last slide. I'll share that one. You remember?
Okay. All right. So yeah, learners are not often good judges of their own life. We're going to come back to this. All right. So just to put things in perspective, we're talking about learner surveys today. We have some training, and hopefully later people are able to apply what they've learned on the job. We might survey them at the end of learning or right after learning. But we also might give a follow-up learner survey. Today, we're not going to go into the follow-up learner survey. We're going to focus on this one. And you've probably seen the typical type of smile sheets, happy sheets that are out there. We have a Likert-like scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree. We have numeric scales. That's fairly typical to what's out there. Now, when I was on my own at Work Learning Research, I asked this question to learning and performance professionals like you. In your opinion, how useful is the data you get from your learner surveys in helping you improve your learning designs, your learning delivery, and your learning support? You can see where the bulk of the answers are. And you might not be able to read that, but I'll blow it up. People said it's only somewhat or not very useful. Only 15% thought the data they get from their learner surveys was very useful. Now, the science sort of confirms our fears. These are two meta-analyses. They looked at over 150 scientific studies, and they found that smile sheets, traditional smile sheets, were correlated with learning results at 0.09. 0.09. Now, what statisticians tell us is anything below 0.30 is considered a weak correlation. So 0.09 is virtually no correlation at all. Now I'm going off this so I can show you. Let me spotlight myself. So I'm going to tell you a story. But from a practical standpoint, first of all, this means that if you get high marks on your smile sheets, on your learner surveys, you could have a very effective course. But almost equally likely, you could have an ineffective course. If you get poor results on your learner surveys, you could have a poorly designed course, but almost equally likely, you could have a well-designed course. With traditional smile sheets, we just can't tell. So I'm going to tell you this famous story. I may have told you this before, not in this session, I don't think, but I like to tell this story because it's so apropos. So there's this famous researcher. He researched the sales process. His name was Neil Rackham, and world famous. He wrote a book called Spin Selling. He was the guy that discovered that salespeople are successful, not to the extent that they could close the deal, but to the extent that they understood the customer's needs and would frame discussions and frame solutions around those needs. And so he was world famous. One day he got invited into this company and they said, Neil, while you're here, we want to show you our new sales training program. We've really got this figured out. what we're doing is we've got all these sales trainers and we've rank ordered them based on their smile sheet ratings. In fact, there's 2 guys at the bottom, and they're not doing that well. We're thinking of firing them, you know. And they said, Neil, can we show you more? And he said, sure. I'm going to make a long story short. So Rackham went in there, and instead of rank ordering these sales trainers on the smile sheet ratings, he rank ordered them on the amount of sales that the trainees were able to sell after the training. And these 2 trainers that were at the bottom on the smile sheets were at the top on the performance of their trainees. When Rackham looked more deeply, he realized what was going on was these sales trainers were challenging the learners more. We're actually having them practice, realistic practice, dealing with sales obstacles, really preparing them. But the trainees felt less confident. They didn't feel as good about things, so they rated the training worse. Perfect example of how our smile sheet ratings can send the wrong messages. All right, here we go. I lost the controls for a minute. All right, here we go. So we got some difficulties. Now, when I first saw this data, my first reaction was, oh my gosh, we should get rid of our smile sheets. We shouldn't use them. They're sending us wrong information. And then I realized, well, wait a minute. We've been using these for decades and decades. They're a tradition. It's hard to get rid of traditions. And it's also respectful to ask our learners what they think. So then I asked the question, well, can we create better learner surveys? And my answer was yes. Obviously, I wrote a book on that. Let me take the spotlight off if I haven't done that. Okay. And so I think we can do better. By the way, this is not just a phenomenon in training, it's also a phenomenon in university teaching. If you need this kind of data, this meta-analysis data to convince your stakeholders, you can find this at this link here. By the way, we'll make the links all available for you. I think I did this last time, but we'll do that again. For some reason today, I'm not able to cut and paste into the chat. I don't know what's going on there, but we'll get you those. So why are our traditional smile sheets ineffective? One reason is we use Likert-like scales. So a Likert scale, and by the way, I used to call it Likert. And then somebody said, Will, I think it's Likert. And I said, really? So I went to investigate, and I found the daughter of Likert who said that the way to pronounce it is Likert, and I sort of trust her. It's her name. Anyway, so we give people a statement, and then we ask them to decide whether they strongly agree, neither agree nor disagree. And we put a number on there. So strongly agree becomes a 5, agree becomes a 4, etc. And then we take an average. And that's one of the problems, because an average doesn't tell us how widely dispersed the data is. It doesn't tell us whether it's skewed to the left or skewed to the right. And when we get these averages, like my course is a 4.1. Well, is that good? Is it bad? Most smile sheet ratings go between 3.8 and 4.5. They're all clustered together. And a lot of us get like paralyzed. Well, what does this mean? We don't know what it means. We don't do anything, and that's not good. The real problem with these is that the resulting scale, this is Sharon Schrock, Bill Coscarelli, is deficient in that the response words, these, are open to many interpretations. They're not concrete enough. And so people have a hard time parsing them, trying to make sense of them. So lots of issues. I like to really break this down. Transmogrify is a great word. It means to transform something in a way that is surprising or magical. And so here's what we're doing. We start with these fuzzy adjectives, and then magically we turn these adjectives into numbers. And by the way, statisticians, mathematicians tell us we're not really allowed to do that. You're not really allowed to take nominal data and turn it into ordinal or interval data. It's not allowed. It's illegal. And yet it's sort of the basis of a lot of what we do in our smile sheets. And then when we've done that, we average the responses and we lose more data that way. And then what we do is we have, maybe let's say we asked only 8 questions. We would take one of those questions and then we come out, this course is a 4.1. So in every phase of this, we are losing information. The data is getting more and more fuzzy, more and more pixelated, if you will. Show me the law. Okay, so here's another problem. Our learners are not always good judges of learning. This is the question I asked before. They have a lot of misconceptions about how learning works. I've been reading some recent research, and it's all, the researchers seem to be like, I don't know, making fun of learners or something, but it's like all about how the learners don't know what they're doing. Now, does this mean we shouldn't ask the learners? No, I don't think so. What I think it means is that we should ask learners questions that they can answer. Ask them questions that they have particular insight on. Make sure we don't bias them. That's sort of obvious, but make sure that they can really wrap their heads around and give us good information. We have to be careful in the questions we ask. So I'm gonna, yeah, Calvin and Hobbes. Thank you. That's where the word transmogrifier, or they use it. I don't know if that's where it came from. So this is my journey to create a better smile sheet. I know you can't read this, but I'm showing you that it was a 2-page thing. It was on paper. It was a while back. This is what I look like now. This is what I look like back then. I had more hair back then. I was definitely more youthful, better looking now, but I was more youthful back then. I just mentioning this to show you it was a long time ago, but this is the journey I took. I used smile sheets in my own work. And I'm showing you this not because it was brilliant and not because it was terrible, because it was a little bit of both, but there's lessons learned. So one of the things I was thinking was, okay, if I do a full day workshop and I give them a smile sheet at 4 p.m, what are they remembering? When they're answering the questions, what are they able to bring into working memory? What are they able to think about? Well, if I give them a smile sheet at 4, they're probably remembering a lot that happened between 3 and 4. They're probably remembering a lot that happened between 8 and 9 in the morning. And the rest of the day is pretty fuzzy. So one of the things I thought, oh, maybe I should remind them. So here's just 2. I usually use like 10 to 15 reminders about what they learned. So I think that's a good idea. That's a good idea. If the learning's somewhat long, you might want to remind them. But then I asked this question, how valuable was the concept to you? And I hate that question. It's too fuzzy. Well, valuable in what way? It doesn't get the learner to think any particular thing. And so then when they give us an answer, we don't know what particular thing they're thinking about. So we don't really know what the data means. Also, numeric data is even fuzzier than Likert-like scales. So I don't like that. Here's another question. How well was the concept taught? Well, this is too fuzzy too. There's all aspects of how well it was taught. And these are sort of Likert-like scale as well. This one's better. If you need to know whether the learners are just being fed information they already know, this is maybe a workable question, at least a good starting point. How new was the concept to you? It's new to me, deepened in early understanding, provided a nice reminder, et cetera. That one's better. Here's another thing I was thinking, that you ever seen people circle the same number all the way down the smile sheet? Yeah. What does that mean? It means they're not thinking that deeply. Not thinking that deeply. So here's my thought. I'm going to put in between, I'm going to give them this question, and in between the numbers, I am going to put in an adjective or a phrase to get them to thinking, oh, let's see, is this above average or below average? My goal was to slow them down, to get them to calibrate, because too often they just circle the same number. If I asked you right now to open up Uber or Lyft and find a driver, I almost guarantee you that that driver is at 4.8, 4.9, or 5.0, right? Because we don't calibrate. We just all go, right? All right. I don't like this question at all, overall value. I don't like the numbers, but the idea of calibrating is a good one. The other thing I did was I asked people for comments. And I know from personal experience that comments on learner surveys can be really valuable. I was a highly mediocre leadership trainer. I eventually got reasonably good at it, but one of the ways was to read my comments. I wouldn't do it this way now. I think it's really better to ask specifically what was good, what was not so good, what could be improved, and then I have another question as well to go with that, which I'll share with you in a minute. So, better learner survey questions. I'm going to take you through this now. One thing I want to recognize is that in the last 10, 15, 20 years, the science of learning has really solidified into some very strong recommendations as represented by some of these research to practice folks, Patty Shank, Miriam Nealon, Carl Kopp, Julie Dirksen, Clark Quinn, and the legendary Ruth Clark. Learning science is really solidified. Obviously, we should use that in our learning designs, but we should also make sure that our learning evaluation is aligned with what we know about the science of learning. All right, so I'm going to take you through this question. I'll tell you why I like it after we read through it. So I'm going to just do this one at a time. I'll let you read through these. Okay, so this question I like, first of all, because it's about something important on the job performance. And number two, there's granularity between the answer choices. No longer are we choosing between strongly agree and agree, fuzzy things. We got much more concreteness. This has three advantages. Number one, the learners are much more motivated to read our questions, much more motivated to give attention to our question. They're not just circling the same numbers. Number two, we are supporting their decision-making. They're not choosing between strongly agree and agree. They're choosing between concrete choices. This gives them something to wrap their heads around, to really think about. They're making more precise decisions, and then our data is more precise. Not perfect, but more precise. And number three, the granularity enables us to have data that is more clear, more powerful than my course is a 4.1. The data can look something like this. Same question, same answer choices. I will say I'm not an accessibility expert. I don't know if my colors are the right colors, so don't just do what I do. I do want to point out these words here. These are called standards. You notice each answer choice gets its own standard. In the book, for every question, I say, I give a standard, but I say, whatever you do, don't use my standards. This is a great opportunity for you to negotiate with your learning team or to negotiate with your organizational stakeholders. What should it be? So let's dive into this. Let's look at this. You've given a training. Let's say you've given a training that's a performance course. So you expect people to perform better on the job or to perform well on the job. You've just given them a training. They come back to you, say, I need more guidance before I know how to use what I learned. So they're telling you, I went to this training, but I either need more training or I need better training, or I need a performance support tool, a job aid, a coach. I need something more. You didn't give me enough. We would say that's probably unacceptable. Now, if this was an awareness course where you were just giving them some information so they could decide if they wanted to learn more, maybe that would be acceptable. So that's why we need to negotiate these things, because it really depends on the learners, the course, the goals, etc. Okay, here's another question that I like. I'll let you read through it. I'll tell you why I like it. Jane, you're asking a good question about expert. Let me tell you what I'm doing there in general. I'm going to go back for a second. I can perform now at an expert level. Whoops. Trigger fingers. Okay, I perform now at an expert level. What I like to do is have what I call an over-the-top answer the choice. It's like one they're unlikely to choose because we're unlikely to get them to that level of competence. So it doesn't have to, you don't have to use the word expert in there, but it's something that's just so wildly beyond what you should expect. I do that specifically so that they don't have this 5 stars kind of feeling that I have to, there's this sort of applied contract that I need to select the top one. I want to help them avoid that so they go back and push in here and think more deeply. So I don't, sometimes you don't really have time to define what expert is, but you can tailor your questions to make them more specific. Okay, I like this question because it's about something important. We're thinking about learning transfer, and we know that transfer can benefit from what happens after training, not just what happens during training. And then these supports can be very valuable. And there's granularity between these answer choices. These are very specific things that we might do. We're going to come back to that question in a bit. Now, those are choice questions. We'll talk about open-ended questions in a minute, but you might say, well, Will, these choice questions, I don't know, these are very different than what we've been giving learners for years. Won't they dislike this? And the answer is, well, I can't believe it. People have been asking me this from the beginning. I said, well, I don't think they liked our original questions. They just circled the same number. They wanted to get out of there. They didn't really want to answer our questions. But I did do a pilot study. And it was with 2 large global organizations, one for-profit, one not-for-profit. And we looked at 20 different types of courses. And they were all varied, technical, soft skills, et cetera, compliance, et cetera. And what the learners said, 80% of the learners liked the new questions better than the old questions. 90% said they liked them equal or better. So this was the evidence from that pilot study, but also this is the anecdotal evidence I get all the time. One of the things that I do recommend, one of the things that if you're gonna put these things into practice, you might get some resistance to the new type of questions. There's a question in the book that enables you to ask your learners about whether they like the questions better or equal to the old type of question. Highly recommend you use that in the beginning because it really will melt the resistance of those in your organization. Oh, the learners like it better. It just seems to make people go, oh, okay, well, we should probably use it. All right. So in the book, I present the questions like this, and I want to sort of point out a couple of things. We only show the learners what's in the white cells of the tables. We don't show them the standards. I didn't make that explicit once, and somebody put like alarming after this question in parentheses. And yeah, it seemed to work, but I don't recommend that because that's sort of biasing them. We also don't show them the rationale, et cetera. So that's one thing. Yeah, we definitely don't show them the standards. Another thing to point out is this word distinctive questioning. People said, Will, I need a name for the kind of question you're asking. And I sort of avoided this for a while, but when I had to come up with a subtitle for the 2nd edition, I struggled, but I finally called them distinctive questions or distinctive questioning, that the answer choices are distinctive. They're not fuzzy, like strongly agree. And these questions have been used not only in classroom training, but also in e-learning, on conference evaluation forms, self-study learning programs, even an employee exit survey. Somebody asked me to help write their employee exit survey, and that went really well. These kind of questions are better because they support people in making decisions, and then we get better data. I mentioned comment questions are important. These are the way I like to write them. You can write them in different ways, but what aspects of the training made it most effective for you? What should we definitely keep as part of the training? What aspects of the training could be improved? And then sometimes I nudge people. Actually, all the time, I really like to nudge people to give constructive feedback, because sometimes people don't want to. They feel, well, my instructor tried as the best they could. I know the instructors and instructional designers did their best. I want to be nice. And we have this nice. So asking for constructive criticism can be better. And then this is well, it's not secret anymore, but it's really a really powerful question. At the very end, is there anything else we should have asked about? Is there anything else you want to tell us? So not a lot of people will answer this question, but those who do often give us really valuable information. And I want you to notice one other thing about the way these things are worded. This is not a survey that comes down from a cold institution. We're trying as much as we can to personalize it. Is there anything else we should have asked about? Okay, so not only are we using we, but we're also sort of sharing some, our authentic selves, our vulnerability. Is there anything else you want to tell us? So we're trying to make it personal so they're more likely to give us information and good information. Do I have any tips on how to get people to answer these? Yes. First of all, ask good questions before you give these. If you ask really good questions to get them thinking, they're going to be more likely to do this. I have a whole chapter now on how to get more responses, a higher response rate, but it's also about how to get more engagement. So there's a lot of recommendations. One is asking better questions. Another is giving them time to answer these questions in your learning if you can. All right, so this is my favorite thing. And this is a unique idea in the learning evaluation space, that not only can our questions gather data, but they can also send messages. In other words, in the behavioral economic sense, they can nudge thoughts and actions. So what kind of messages will this question send? Well, it sends a message. It nudges us to think about after training supports. That can be very valuable to get people thinking about that. It also has some very specific sort of micro messages. Oh, maybe managers should be involved. Maybe in important courses, maybe we ought to have coaches or mentors. Maybe the course instructor shouldn't disappear like I did as a leadership trainer. Maybe they should stay involved afterwards. Maybe we should have job aids. Maybe there should be a learning app to remind people. I'll tell you a great story. The story's in the book. Gentleman by the name of Ian Blake worked for Tetra Pak, and he's a smart guy, and he knew that he just didn't want to like create a new survey and roll it out. He's thinking, I need to take a change management, stakeholder management kind of approach. So he invited several of his instructors, his subject matter experts, into his office one at a time to give him feedback on the new survey design. And one of these guys he invited in, and he's showing them the questions. And in this question, Ian had tailored it a little bit. I do recommend tailoring, not just using the generic questions as I write them. And he said, one of the question stems said, and remember, this is the learners answering this, I will be enrolled in my instructor's Yammer feed so that I get reminders and reinforcement after the learning. And when when this subject matter expert came to this question, he goes, this Yammer idea, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. Take that option out of there. Nobody's going to do that. And Ian's like, oh, thank you very much. So the guy left the office. The very next day, this guy came back and said, hey, Ian, last night I was thinking about that Yammer response. That's brilliant. I'm going to now add Yammer to all my courses. Now think about that. This learner survey had never been deployed. No learner had ever looked at it. No data had ever been collected. And yet, this question had already created benefits for us. Remember going back to one of the original principles that we evaluate to make something happen? Getting data is not the only way to make things happen. So we can ask questions to send messages. If we're doing online training, we might need to send messages about the fact that you got to keep people's attention, really important. When we worked with I did some work with ISPI, they wanted to use a new conference evaluation form. They also wanted to emphasize their brand image of being research-based. And so I created some questions related to research. These are just two of the questions. And that supported their brand. It sent a message to the people in their conference, to the members, the attendees in the conference, that research was really important to ISPI. It sent a message to the speakers. Oh, wow. these are the questions that are going to be asked. I better bring my A game with my research. It just really supported their brand. We did this at the L&D conference 2020 and 2021. We asked questions that supported our brand, and we wanted to know, are we meeting our goals of our brand? So one of the questions I ask learning teams is, what's your learning team's brand image? What questions do you want to ask? What do you want to emphasize? Do you want to ask about the coffee, the temperature in the room? That's perfectly fine. The brand image is you care about people. Do you want to ask questions about effectiveness, whether you can use this on the job? Then you're a performance improvement kind of brand. All right, so let's finish up with some questions for you. What do you think? Is this a good learner survey question? Is it good, okay, or bad? Bad, 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 bad. Okay. I think you just chose bad because there's 3 letters in it and it's less work than the others. Now it's bad. And Will Thalheimer doesn't like it. Look, it's a Likert-like scale here. Also, the learners are not going to have particular insights about the workshop structure related to their learning. They're not going to be able to make those connections. That's not a good question at all. Okay, Rich, can you get rid of your star, please? Because it might not be relevant in the next. Thank you. All right. So what about this one? These are actually 2 questions that go together. You take a vacation with a guy and he thinks he can like put stars all over your slides. Hey, just because we've shared some beers together. All right, what do you think about this? This is a choice question here, and going with the choice question, there's an open-ended question as well. What do you think about this combination? Let me draw a line in the sand here. You think this is good, okay, or bad? Okay, you guys like this? Well, thank you very much. This is a question I developed for a workshop I taught on how to write scenario questions. And, but if you tell me it's bad, my first instinct will be, I believe you. Here's what happens. You write a question, you look at it, you go, it's perfect. Then you look at it the next day and you go, what was I thinking? Then you improve it, you show it to your clients or the people you're working with, and they go, well, it's okay, but you could have, our learners aren't going to think about it this way. My point is, what I've learned is an iterative process is really valuable. You tell me you think it's bad, certainly I could make it better, but here's why I like it. I expect by the end of a full day workshop on learner survey questions, if I can get them to be able to be willing to write their own questions, I'm there. It's a hard thing, write scenario questions. So I'm pretty happy if I get them to D. If they can tell a good question from a bad one, I'm not really happy, but I'm somewhat satisfied. So this does some nice distinction work for me. And then after that, I get a sense of how everybody's feeling. And then I get richness. I get real details here in this open-ended question. So I wouldn't add an open-ended question with every choice question because you overload your learners, but that combination I like. I think it's nice. All right. A brilliant, yes, you can delegate questions to Will. A brilliant learner survey question. All right. Now that you've engaged in Will Thalheimer's overview of learner survey questions, please share your current sense of these questions. They can be worthwhile tools for evaluating learning. Learner surveys are essential to getting feedback for improvement. Or Will Thalheimer is a charming and thoughtful advocate for the most powerful learning method of all time. All right. Yeah, thank you, Raul. I can always count on Raul. All right. Okay. Okay. Oh my gosh. All right. Now, I asked this question to make a joke, but also to warn you about something that happens in the learning space, learning evaluation space, is some people ask questions with only positive answers. And if anybody chooses any one of these answers, then the result looks positive, even though that's crazy, right? This is an actual question that a well-known learner survey vendor sends to their learners. Crazy. First of all, it's nuts because people don't know, like if their Microsoft Excel course decreased cycle time or risk. But it's even worse because if they answer it, you have a positive result. Always have to have negatives and positives. All right, so some closing thoughts. I say this over and over and over in the book. I wish somebody would count up all the times I say this in the book. It must be over 20 or 30. Don't just use learner surveys. All right. True or false? And if you could turn on your cameras now, because we're going to do a thumbs up, thumbs down exercise now. If you're in your pajamas or you're naked or something, don't do it. But no, other than that. All right, here we go. So measuring learning is worth the investment, even when the data is not as meaningful as we might hope it to be. What do you think? True or false? Or you can go like this too. Yeah, okay. So one of the things we get stuck on is thinking that our things have to be perfect. They don't. But usually if we do things well designed, we can be worth the investment. What about this one? Measuring soon after learning provides useful information about whether the training has supported learners in remembering what they learned. True or false? All right, I see mostly falses in the few people I can see. That's great, that is correct. Learner surveys, sometimes called smile sheets, provide at least some indication about whether learning was effective. Yeah, you guys are all over the place. So this is a trick question, right? Because poorly designed ones are going to tell us nothing or going to tell us worse than nothing. Well-designed ones can give us some hints about what's effective. And your final one, Likert-like scales using a scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree are the gold standard for learner surveys. True or false? I like your emphasis. You yeah, that's all right, great. All right, look, I didn't have time for a lot of things today. We're going to cover a bunch of things next week. You guys asked some really good questions about stuff and like that. So with that, I am going to end the session for today. There's no particular homework today. I'm going to give you homework next time. So just thank you very much for attending. This was fun.